Good evening and welcome to the American Antiquarian Society's public program, Sharing the Archives, Open Access Case Studies in American History with Olivia Chiang. We're grateful to all of you for attending this evening, whether you are here in person in Antiquarian Hall or joining us on YouTube. The American Antiquarian Society is located on the ancestral homelands of the Nipmuc community, who remain a vibrant presence here in central Massachusetts. I'm Scott Casper, president of the American Antiquarian Society. Our mission is to cultivate a deeper understanding of the American past, grounded in the primary sources we've been collecting since 1812, 4.5 million primary sources and counting. In addition to welcoming visitors and researchers from all over the world and right here in Worcester, we also host programs like this one tonight, which provide insights into the past and its resonance for our own day. This program is being recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube page after tonight's program, so you can encourage your friends to watch it, you can assign it or encourage your students to see it, and so on. We thank you for joining us this evening. As a nonprofit organization, we welcome any support that you can provide to help programs like this continue. Thanks so much. Our speaker tonight is a recent AAS-ACLS Community College Faculty Research Fellow. These fellowships, which are the newest fellowships at AAS, offer scholars in the humanities who teach at 2-year degree-granting institutions the opportunity to pursue their research in virtual, hybrid, or on-site residencies at humanities research centers like AAS. This program, which is sponsored by the American Council of Learned Societies, the ACLS, recognizes that many community college professors who have significant teaching responsibilities and often little institutional research support can't spend even a full month on site here in Worcester. Typically, these fellowships at AAS, and we have 5 of these fellows at AAS over the course of this year, combine some in-person residency right here in Worcester with access to our digitized collections from their own locations. And we've been delighted that the ACLS has chosen AAS for these fellowships this year. Professor Olivia Chiang has taught art history at Connecticut State Community College, Manchester, formerly known as Manchester Community College, since 2011. Her teaching and research focus on expanding the range and diversity of histories told and taught beyond the traditional canon. She holds an MA in the history of art from Yale University and a BA in history and art history from Tufts University. She was previously awarded a National Endowment for the Humanities grant for her digital anthology and collaboration with Smart History called Not Your Grandfather's Art History. Her program tonight builds on her recent fellowship here at AAS to consider how several objects in the AAS collection unlock unfamiliar histories and provide opportunities for teachers and students alike. Olivia Chiang, welcome back to AAS.
Thank you, Scott. That was very lovely. And thank you all for being here, both the folks who are in person tonight as well as online and maybe in future viewings. I'm delighted to be here. It's a real honor. I just want to thank ACLS for their generous support for these fellowships, and of course the American Antiquarian Society for their support, for their amazing collections, and for the flexibility to do this largely from home while I was researching, but also raising 3 young kids. So very grateful to that. And Scott, I'm very glad that you mentioned the Nipmuc, who have been the stewards of this land that we are now on for thousands of years, as well as other tribal communities, and they continue to do so, like you said. I also would like to just acknowledge Tim McCleary, who currently teaches at Little Bighorn Tribal College at Crow Agency in Montana. He was really critical to my research as well, particularly with the Plenty Coup photo, which you can see at the back, along with the other 2 objects that we'll focus on tonight. Okay, so so the title of the program is Sharing the Archives, Open Access Case Studies in American History. And like Scott said, my work has really been focusing on shining a light on histories, on objects, on perspectives that you don't typically find in published textbooks. And also particularly to share those histories in a way that there's no financial barrier to students, to audiences reading or accessing. So the ultimate goal of these essays, which you'll hear in large part tonight, will be published as open access resources in the near future. So tonight we'll start with a photograph of Booker T. Washington that is currently in the AAS's collection, their digital collection of the Tuskegee Institute. So I'm going to share the photo now on the screen. It's also at the back. The original is at the back of the room tonight. And so this is a family portrait, ultimately, which is quite unique among the collection. The other images in the collection feature students at their work. It features buildings. It features images of the faculty. But this is a really special photograph. This is quite an intimate photograph. And actually serves as the photo opposite the title page in Booker T. Washington's first autobiography, which was titled The Story of My Life and My Work. And so you can see that here, where the family photo is, again, opposite the title page, so the frontispiece here of his first memoir, which was published in 1900. And I'd just like to preface this whole talk by saying that, so we'll be focusing on 3 objects. They happen to feature 3 men. That wasn't necessarily my plan setting out, but that's how it happened. But more importantly, I was never taught the stories of these 3 men or their lives or their communities or their life's work. So this is a project that I hope to share with others, with students, but it was also very much a journey for myself to educate myself. So let's talk a little bit about who Booker T. Washington was. He was a man who was born into slavery in either 1858 or 1859 in Virginia. His mother was a woman named Jane, also enslaved. His father was a white man that he never knew. He was probably around 7 or 8 years old when the Civil War ended in 1865. And at that point, he and his family, now freed from enslavement, they moved from Virginia to West Virginia, to Malden, West Virginia. And this is where Booker T began his educational journey. He started by working through a book that his mother had provided him. And then eventually he started going to school. And Booker T becomes a lifelong educator. So he talks about his lifelong love of learning. And he wrote in his memoir, which we just saw here, "The first day I entered school, it seemed to me, was the happiest day I have ever known." It was also at this first school in Malden, West Virginia, that Booker took on the last name Washington, because prior to this, he had never had a formal last name before. From his school in Malden, he would go on to attend the Hampton Institute, which was a school that aimed to educate formerly enslaved individuals, and was founded and run by this gentleman here, General Samuel Chapman Armstrong. And Armstrong will go on to be this ever-present mentor and figure in Washington's life. Excuse me. It was at this time when Washington was at the Hampton Institute that his mother passed away, and he notes in his autobiography, her pivotal role in introducing him to a life of learning and education, something that she had been denied throughout her life. Washington studied law also as a young man, but he kept feeling like law wasn't his true calling, that going back to teaching, to education, was where his heart lay. And in 1879, he was invited by Samuel Chapman Strong to return to Hampton Institute, this time to give the commencement address there, and then he began working there as a faculty member He worked with night students, actually, who would work for 10 hours a day and then come to the institute to learn for 2 hours at a night. And this really resonated with me because I know a lot of my students at Manchester, right? They're balancing both as well. They're working full time and then they're also pursuing their education. And it's through this relationship with Chapman Armstrong that Washington is given this opportunity to become the founder of a new school for Black students called the Tuskegee Institute. And this had begun actually as a movement within the community of Tuskegee, Alabama, to begin what was called a normal school. Anyone know what a normal school is or was, Elizabeth? Excellent. Very good. So yes, very good. A normal school was intended to train teachers, to teach teachers. And that was the original idea, is to teach a new generation of Black educators, which could then go out and teach students throughout Alabama and perhaps the greater South. So this was the original idea. And this was largely driven by a man named Mr. Lewis Adams, a formerly enslaved man who lived near Tuskegee and saw the need for African-American teachers in his community. So Washington took up this opportunity. He was hired to be the first principal in 1881. And this is how he describes that initial experience. He said, "When I reached Tuskegee, the only thing that had been done toward the starting of a school was the securing of $2,000. There was no land, building, or apparatus. I opened the school, however, on the 4th of July, 1881, in an old church and a little shanty that was almost ready to fall down from decay. On the first day, there was an attendance of 30 students, mainly those who had been engaged in teaching in the public schools of that vicinity. It was in such a dilapidated condition that whenever it rained, one of the larger pupils would very kindly cease his lessons and hold the umbrella over me while I heard the recitations." And he actually talked about, on his journey to get to Tuskegee, to start his new job, he couldn't even find it on the map. It was sort of an out-of-the-way place at the time. But we'll see how, under Washington's leadership, the Tuskegee Normal Institute grows quickly, and it expands, and eventually it becomes renamed the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. Washington secured 700 acres of farm property, a barn, a chicken coop, and a kitchen were turned into classrooms and dormitories. And by the time his autobiography was published in 1900, the school had grown to 2,460 acres. And he talks also about how the entire community of Tuskegee, both Black and white, came together to support the school. Excuse me. One of the really interesting things that I discovered in reading Washington's The Story of My Life and Work was how integrated his family life was in his work and his life at Tuskegee. So, for example, he was married 3 times. 2 of his wives died, unfortunately, very early, but all 3 of them were somehow connected to the school. So his first wife, for example, her name was Fanny Smith. She was one of the original 4 teachers, 4 faculty members. His second wife, Olivia Davidson, was the assistant principal. And then his third wife, who we saw earlier in the family portrait, Maggie James Murray, also worked at the school. And it was his first wife, Fanny, who gave birth to his oldest child, their daughter Portia, who you see in the lower right there with the glasses on, and she's seated. She was born in 1883. Unfortunately, her mother died the year after in 1884. And Washington wrote, "From the first, she, Fanny, most earnestly devoted her thought and time to the work of the school, and was completely one with me in every interest and ambition. She passed away, however, before she had an opportunity to see what the school was designed to be. Excuse me. So during his marriage to Fanny, Portia's mother, the school continued to grow, where the students were now running an active farm. They grew sugarcane, cotton, sweet potatoes, peaches, and other crops. And in the 10 years between 1884, when when Fanny died, and 1894, the number of students, teachers, and buildings grew. They added a sawmill. They opened a night school. And in 1884, Washington went on a speaking tour to Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston to raise money specifically to fund a new building called Alabama Hall, which we see here. And the bricks that were used to build Alabama Hall were actually made by the students themselves. And Washington writes, "From the first, we have carried out the plan at Tuskegee of asking help for nothing that we could do for ourselves. Nothing has been bought that the students can produce. The boys have done the painting, made the bricks, the chairs, tables, and desks, have built a stable, and are now moving the carpenter shop. The girls do the entire housekeeping, including the washing, ironing, and mending of the boys' clothing. Besides, they make garments to sell, and some give attention to flower gardening." So the school came, like I said, to have a farm, a carpenter shop, a blacksmith shop, a printing office, a brick-making yard, as well as facilities for beekeeping, sawmilling, wheelwrighting, and a windmill for pumping water into the school. In 1885, Washington married again. Let me go back here. This time to Olivia Davidson, who, as I mentioned before, served as the assistant principal of the school. And Washington stated in his autobiography, "Miss Davidson came to the school almost from the very beginning. She being the next person to come after myself. I have spoken in other places of the great assistance she was in helping to build up the school from its earliest days." They went on to have two sons, the two boys that we see here. So we have Baker Taliaferro, also known as Booker Jr. He's the older boy. And then Ernest Davidson, who is the younger son. Olivia would only live 4 more years, passing away in 1889. By October of 1893, Washington had married Maggie James Murray, who also taught at Tuskegee. And Washington wrote of Murray, "She has proven in every way herself to be equally interested in the advancement of Tuskegee as myself, and fully bears her share of the responsibilities and labor, especially giving a special attention to the development of the girls and to work among the women through her mother's meetings in various parts of Alabama and elsewhere." So it's this photo that, again, really highlights not only Washington's life, but again, how it was his family life that revolved around his work, and probably vice versa. And so the photo itself, we don't know who took the photograph. We don't even know when it was taken exactly. Based on my research, I would argue it was probably taken in or around 1895. This is a really critical year for Washington. This is the year that he gives his very famous speech at the Cotton States and International Exposition, which we'll get into now. So, in 1895, Booker T. Washington, was invited to travel to Washington, D.C. to address the Appropriations Committee of the United States Congress regarding allocating money to support an exposition in Atlanta, which we now refer to as the Cotton States and International Exposition. And this was really to highlight what had been achieved in the South in the 30 years after the Civil War, And Washington specifically stated, "I tried to emphasize the fact that political agitation alone would not save the Negro, that back of politics he must have industry, thrift, intelligence, and property, that no race without these elements of strength could permanently succeed and gain the respect of fellow citizens." And this is a bit of foreshadowing to what he will say in his address at the Cotton States Exposition. I wanted to share this photograph of Booker T because this one is one that we have a date for. This is from 1895, and this was taken likely on that trip to the Capitol to address Congress, and it was taken by a woman photographer, Frances Benjamin Johnston. She was quite an interesting character in her day and age. She was a woman who set up a photography studio in the nation's capital in 1890. She had a lot of connections, so she was able to photograph 5 American presidents, Mark Twain, Susan B. Anthony, and others. She would also be commissioned to take photographs at the Hampton Institute, which was Washington's alma mater, and then she would eventually go to take photographs at Tuskegee in 1892. So after his trip to the Capitol, Congress passed the bill that would allow the money for the exposition to be approved. So the exposition went forward. And it's here that Tuskegee, the Institute itself, actually puts on a display in what was called at the time the Negro Building at the exposition. And it featured products that had been made at the 26 departments of the Institute. And Washington thought that this was, quite a mark of success of the Institute to be able to do this. He was also invited to give an opening address at the exposition. And he described it as this being the first time in the history of the South that a Negro had been invited to take part on a program with white Southern people on any important and national occasion. And he talked about his sort of anxiousness leading up to this speaking engagement. He knew the gravity of this opportunity and he didn't want to mess it up. And he describes rehearsing his speech for Maggie as well as other faculty members at Tuskegee to sort of, gain a little bit more confidence going into the speech. So on September 17th, 1895, one day prior to the opening of the exposition, Washington and the whole family, Maggie, Portia, Baker, and Ernest, all traveled from Tuskegee to Atlanta, Georgia. It's about 125 miles. And he gave his address. I'm going to try to play an audio recording of it now. So this recording is a later recording. So the speech was originally given live in 1895, but the recording is actually from 1908, but this is Washington's own voice. And then it was made public in 1920. So I'm going to see if I can do this. Hang on. Sorry, Nate.
President and gentlemen of the board of directors and citizens. 1/3 of the population of the South is of the Negro race. No enterprise seeking the material, civil, or moral welfare of this section can disregard this element of our population and reach the highest success. I will convey to you, Mr. President and directors, the sentiment of the masses of my race when I say that in no way have the value and manhood of the American Negro been more fittingly and generously recognized than by the managers of this magnificent exposition at every stage of its progress. It is a recognition that will do more to cement the friendship of the two races than any occurrence since the dawn of our freedom. Now, not only this, but the opportunity here afforded will awaken among us a new era of industrial progress. Ignorant and inexperienced, it is not strange that in the first years of our new life, we began at the top instead of the bottom. that a seat in Congress or the state legislature was more sought than real estate or industrial skill, that the political convention or stump speaking had more attraction than starting a dairy farm or a truck garden.
Okay. So that's just it's a fragment of the speech that is in this recording. And so we just get to listen a little bit to Washington's actual voice there, which I think is pretty cool. Okay. So despite his nervousness about how the speech would go, Washington talks about getting the sort of overwhelmingly positive response to the address. And this is what will become known as the Atlanta Compromise speech in sort of historical understanding. And after this, Washington really becomes a national figure. He is, for example, even recommended or suggested that he take a cabinet position at a certain point in time. He's given an honorary degree by Harvard University. After the speech, he's also given offers to go on speaking tours where he could make tens of thousands of dollars. And that's roughly, $2 million today, right? $50,000 at the time was about $2 million today. So huge sums of money. But what I found really interesting about, Washington's telling of this period of his life was that he turned those very lucrative opportunities down because he thought that they would take away from his life and his work at Tuskegee. And for him, that was the most important thing. It's also possible that on the trip back from Atlanta, his family was photographed in the city at a photographer's studio. We see that obviously it's a pretty formal portrait, right? The two ladies are seated, the men are standing, they're all dressed very, very well, and there's this backdrop behind them. Which is different than, again, all the other photographs in this collection here, that a lot of them are either exterior shots of buildings or they're interior shots of students at work. Okay. And so in conclusion for this image, the essay on this image, Washington will go on to write 2 more autobiographies. This is his first. And again, it's published in 1900. So it really sort of ends there. But, he became, again, this national figure, as I mentioned. And also in reading his book, in which this photograph is featured, I found it really interesting because it really nuances, our understanding of the American South and of community in the American South. And so, for instance, and I thought I would end on this note for this particular image, Jabez Curry, who was a former Confederate officer and slave owner, he wrote the introduction to this autobiography. And he said this of Washington. He said, "Fewer living Americans have made a deeper impression on public opinion, softened or removed so many prejudices, or awakened greater hopefulness in relation to the solution of a problem, encompassed with 1,000 difficulties and perplexing the mind of philanthropists and statesmen." So we'll end there with this image. And again, I would love if everyone could take a look at the original at the end of the program tonight. We'll now turn to my second image. Let me just get caught up here. And this photograph, also from the AAS collection, a different group of objects though. This is a photograph of Chief Plentycou, the Crow chief. So I wanted to start with a little biography of Plentycou, the man you see featured here. He was born in 1848, so about 10 years prior to Booker T. Washington, in what is now Billings, Montana. His mother was a Crow woman named Otter Woman. His father's name was Coyotes Appear. And as a child, in his, and I'll get to this part more in a second, but in his autobiography, Plenty-Coup describes living this traditional Crow life. So at the time when Plenty-Coup was a child, the Crow, like other Plains tribes, still carried out their nomadic lifestyles, traveling on horseback across the plains, following the herds of American bison, or what they refer to as buffalo, and being raised by their elders in their traditional ways. I wanted to ask the audience, though, here who's seated tonight, what you notice, though, about this photograph that you see before you. And I know some of us may have talked about this before the start of the program, but is there anything you notice about this photograph? He is holding a book. Yes, he is holding a book. And this book, you probably might be able to see the title of it. The large print title, you could see the word American. Yes, right? And so the full title of this book is called American, The Life Story of a Great Indian. And so this is Plenty-Coup holding his own book. This is his autobiography, which I think is really cool. And it's also a very unique photograph within the collection, and as we'll get into that in a little bit. So this photograph is from around 1930 when the book was published. And this is where Tim McCleary was a huge help for me. Tim shared with me that this was taken as a promotional photograph for the book, right? So very different than a lot of the other images that we find from the 19th century of Native American people. It's very much has a lot more agency than the photographs that you will typically find. Tim also helped me identify the photographer. His name was Fred Miller, and he will come along later in the story, but he lived on the Crow Reservation, came to know Plenty-Coup quite well. So it was more of a familiar relationship between photographer and sitter than we would find, again, in many other instances. So the really fascinating thing about Plenty-Coup is that his life really straddled two worlds, especially for Native Americans, for the Crow people especially. So, for example, he describes his childhood as the following: "We followed the buffalo herds over our beautiful plains, fighting a battle one day and sending out a war party against the enemy the next. My heart was afire. I wished so to help my people, to distinguish myself, that I might wear an eagle's feather in my hair. How I worked to make my arms strong as a grizzly's, and how much I practiced with my bow. A boy never wished to be a man more than I." And actually, he talks about how early in his life, his grandfather actually gave him the name Plenty-Coup, which means many achievements. And his grandfather sort of foresaw that he would be a great man and a leader of his community. And Plenty-Coup, actually, at the age of 9, he talks about having this supernatural experience following the death of his older brother, in which he also sort of foresees himself becoming a chief. And this really sort of motivates him to realize these prophecies. He has another vision or supernatural experience at the age of 10, where in the vision he sees the sudden and complete disappearance of the buffalo, or the American bison, only to be replaced by cattle. The vision also presented Plenty-Coup with an image of himself as an elderly man sitting on his own porch, right? Which I think is quite foreshadowing here to the actual image that we're looking at. And lastly, in this vision, Plenty-Coup is shown that he is this embodiment of what we would call the chickadee person. And the voice that spoke to him in this vision said to him, describing the chickadee person, said, "He is the least in strength, but strongest of mind among his kind. He is willing to work for wisdom. The chickadee person is a good listener. Nothing escapes his ears, which he has sharpened by constant use. He gains success and avoids failure by learning how others succeeded or failed, and without great trouble to himself. Develop your body, do not neglect your mind, Plenty Coups. It is the mind that leads man to power, not strength of body. And so at this young age, Plenty Coups has this sense of self, right? That he will be a leader of his people and really embodies the medicine of the chickadee person, right? To lead his people. And this serves him well because during his lifetime, this is when we see the disappearance, the decimation of tens of millions of American bison to only a few hundred animals. And this was done largely through several means, right? But so you have white settlers claiming lands from tribal peoples, implementing commercial hunting practices. They're using guns instead of arrows. We also, and part of the commercial hunting practices was to just hunt for the hides, and the rest of the bison would be left to rot. Also, the railroads are expanding that cut into bison habitat, and the railroads also facilitated sport, hunting bison for sport. And then lastly, there was also the sort of policies, sort of unofficial policies that were sanctioned by the U.S. military to encourage hunting of bison to starve out the native populations. So Plenty Coups witnessed all of this, right? He saw it in his vision and then he witnessed it in real life. And he writes in his book, "When the buffalo went away, the hearts of my people fell to the ground, and they could not lift them up again. After this, nothing happened. There was little singing anywhere." So this is one sort of seismic change that Plenty Coups witnesses to his people. Also, Plenty Coups is instrumental in the delegations of Crow chiefs who travel from Montana to Washington, D.C. These were these delegations that were sent to negotiate treaties with the U.S. government. So the first treaty that was negotiated was signed at Fort Laramie in 1851. And at that time, in 1851, the Crow were given 38 million acres. But 17 years later, at the signing of the second treaty at Fort Laramie, they were reduced to only 8 million acres. And at this point in time, too, members of the Crow tribe were encouraged to take a plot of 320 acres to farm. So this shift from a nomadic hunter lifestyle to a now settled agrarian lifestyle. And this is something that actually Plenty Coups did do. He did take a plot and begin a farm and a ranch. I'm showing you a really powerful image here. This is a work by the artist Wendy Red Star. If anyone has heard of her, she's phenomenal. She herself is Crow, and she has taken these archival photos of, in this case, Plenty Coups, but others who traveled to Washington for these peace talks with the U.S. government, and they were photographed in studio. In this case here, the photographer was C.M. Bell, and they're posed in their regalia. And what she has done much more recently is to go back in with this sort of bright pink pen to highlight components of the regalia and to include information, right, from her tribal community, from the ancestors, from the descendants of these people, filling in that history, filling in that story, giving voice back to the sitters like Plenty Coups here. So Plenty Coups also saw this change, but he also encouraged his people to change with the reality of the situation. For example, he said, "Stop mourning the old days. They are gone with the buffalo. Go to your sweat lodges and cleanse your bodies. Then clean out your dirty lodges and go to work. I, Plenty Coup, your chief, ask you to do this before you are ruined forever. So again, sort of embodying that chickadee person, right? He is looking to listen, not necessarily to fight back, but to enable his people to survive. And Plenty Coup did not have any biological children of his own, but instead saw the Crow tribe as his family, as his children, and that he would look out for them. The Crow continued to lose land due to the Northwest Pacific Railroad cutting through their territory. And so really seeing this, this decimation of what Crow life used to be like. We're also seeing the rise at this time of photography. So about 40 years prior to this portrait being taken, photography had been invented, and it was particularly well suited to portraiture, right? Because you had to sit fairly still for quite some time. And Plenty Coup himself would be photographed many times throughout his life, including by famous photographers of Native American people, including Edward S. Curtis. William Wildschut was another one, as well as others. Now, traditionally, as I mentioned before, if we look at studio portraits of Native American people from the 19th century, they tend to have this very objectifying ethnographic tone to them, very much sort of driven by this sense that Native people would be gone, are disappearing, right? And so the photographs would be to document them, their regalia, their lifestyle before they were gone. So you could see the difference between a photograph like this by William Henry Jackson, and this is one in the AAS's collection of these 4 Ponca chiefs, compared with the photograph that is the main focus of this essay here. And again, this was taken by Fred Miller. So Fred Miller started out as a civil servant who lived on the Crow Reservation between 1897 and 1910, where he photographed life there. His wife, Emma Smith, was part Shawnee, and they were both actually adopted into the Crow tribe by another chief, Medicine Crow, in 1905. He was even given the Crow name Box Potapesh, meaning high kicker, which they think might have come from him playing like football with the kids on the reservation. And so again, he was able to develop a much closer, more intimate relationship with Plenty Coup than other photographers like C.M. Bell, for instance, were able to. And the other really interesting thing about researching this photograph, and by extension, reading his autobiography, was that Plenty Coup actually didn't know how to write. He was technically illiterate. So he orally conveyed his life story to Frank Linderman, who was a writer, he was a journalist, he ended up becoming a Montana state politician, but he also recorded tribal histories, including Plenty Coup's, as well as Pretty Shield, who was a Crow medicine woman. And they also communicated through Plains Indian Sign Language. So thus, Linderman was given the moniker Great Sign Talker because of how he communicated. And I just want to end this essay with a quote from the autobiography by Plenty Coup to Linderman. He said, "I am glad I have told you these things, Sign Talker. You have felt my heart, and I have felt yours. I know you will tell only what I have said to you, that your writing will be straight like your tongue, and I will sign your paper with my thumb, so that your people and mine will know I told you the things you have written down." So, 2 photos with 2 autobiographies. All right. So our last image is this one. Just kidding. But actually, I was wondering if anyone had watched this series, the Apple TV Plus series that came out this summer featuring Jason Momoa. Very sort of coincidental. I was doing my research and Like I was telling Nan and Scott, my husband was watching this at the time. So I share this because Jason Momoa in this series, Chief of War, he plays a historical figure named Kayana, who was an 18th century Hawaiian warrior and noble who once served Kamehameha the First. So Kamehameha the First is actually the focus of this last essay, and his the original engraving that we're seeing here on the screen is also in the back. I won't spoil the series, but just to say that Kayana's star fades as Kamehameha's ascends. So we'll segue now to Kamehameha the First. And he is another American figure in American history who really sees this complex, multifaceted change within his world, within his community, within his people. So Kamehameha the First was the man who conquered all of the Hawaiian Islands and ruled as its first king beginning in 1795. Prior to this, the islands were ruled by various chiefs who were all drawn from the Hawaiian noble class. And during Kamehameha's life, James Cook, the British explorer, became the first European to make contact with the Hawaiian Islands, also known as at the time as the Sandwich Islands. And this was in 1778. Cook would go on to die the year later, unfortunately through a sort of situation that turned out poorly. But this just opened up to the continuing presence of British and then American vessels and people in the Hawaiian Islands. So through various mechanisms, Kamehameha first becomes the king of the island of Hawaii in 1791. And throughout his ongoing attempts to conquer and consolidate the islands under his control, we see the introduction of European weaponry, cannons, gunpowder, guns, alongside the use of traditional Hawaiian weapons like spears, for instance. He also ordered the building of ships, both in the traditional Hawaiian style as well as the now imported European style. And so under Kamehameha, the Kingdom of Hawaii became a center of trade routes that connected North America, Asia, Russia, South America, as well as Europe indirectly. And so speaking of this point of connection, okay, in 1815, a Russian ship set out seeking the Northwest Passage. This was, as we know, right, this elusive passage connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. And so the ship, the Rurik, made land in Hawaii, and on board was an artist named Louis Corris, who in 1816 did portrait sketches of both Kamehameha and one of his wives. And what we're looking at here is the finished version of those sketches. And this is known as the red vest portrait. So we see the king, Kamehameha, here in this red vest. This is done in ink wash, and watercolor on paper. Now this is where things get really interesting. So here we have this portrait by this Russian artist who has made landfall in the Kingdom of Hawaii. Somehow that red vest portrait makes its way to the Philippines, to Manila, where an anonymous Chinese artist or artists made oil-painted versions based off of that original watercolor portrait by Corris. And then this copy done in oil by an unknown Chinese artist made its way back to Hawaii to serve as the model for the engraving, which we see in the back and which is in the AAS's collection. And we'll certainly return to this portrait in particular in just a minute. Okay. Also at this time, the first Christian missionaries are landing in Hawaii. And so we'll take a look here at, this is Hiram Bingham and his wife Sybil, who I found have some really interesting connections to Connecticut, where I live and teach. Bingham was originally from Vermont, but he preached in Connecticut. He and his wife were married in Hartford, Connecticut, and then 8 days after their wedding, sailed for Hawaii. And there they met the Queen, who would go on to embrace Christianity, would be baptized by Hiram Bingham. And so we're starting to see now the establishment of these Protestant, specifically congregational mission schools, with the dual purposes to convert local Hawaiians and for them to become teachers and missionaries themselves. At one such school in Lahainaluna, I think I got it there. I can't do it. Sorry, guys. Lahainaluna. There we go. Lahainaluna, which means Upper Lahaina, which translates as scorching sun. A school was established by the Reverend Lauren Andrews, and he set up a printing press there. The press was originally intended to produce products for the school, like maps and other materials. And even though Andrews set up the press, it was local Hawaiians who did all of the engravings, who did all of the artwork itself. And so when we come back to this portrait of Kamehameha the First, this was engraved by a local man named Kepohoni, which translates as Cape Horn. And this was done in 1840, so quite some time after the original Lewis Corus watercolor had been made, right? But it was described by those who knew the king as a striking likeness to the king himself. Kepohoni would also go on to do a beautiful portrait of Kamehameha's daughter, the Princess Kamamalu. And this also, interestingly enough, was based on a Chinese oil, which was based on this original portrait by John Hayter when the princess and her husband traveled to London. Kepohoni also completed botanical engravings like the one you see here. This is a plant which is originally native to Mexico, but was brought by a ship to the islands itself. And then after 40, 50 years of it first making landfall, had reproduced and flourished on the islands. And the last image I will share for this essay, as well as for my presentation tonight, is this landscape view that Kepohoni, the artist who did the portrait of Kamehameha, completed. And this is called View of Kailua, which is on the island of Hawaii. And we see some really interesting buildings in this landscape here. It's a combination of traditional thatched houses as well as imported architectural structures. Probably what you can see best, although it is difficult, but we can look at the original in just a minute, is the stone church with a steeple, which is the oldest Christian church on the Hawaiian Islands. Some of the stones that were used to build this church came from a nearby traditional Hawaiian temple. We also see a two-story building, which was built based on a design originally from Boston on the site of the Kamakahonu. And the Kamakahonu was originally the residence of King Kamehameha, and this is also where he performed his personal religious practice, as well as the place where his remains were left after he died, before they were then moved. So sort of in coming full circle in this through the engravings, I should say, of Kepahoni, who completed this engraving again here, we see a pivotal era of Hawaiian history, right, coming full circle. From a portrait likeness of its first king of all the Hawaiian Islands to a depiction of the physical landscape of Hawaii, forever changed by the introduction of Christianity, the loss of the traditional Hawaiian kapu system, as well as foreign settlement. And I'll end there. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Olivia. We're
Sure.
We have a few minutes for questions. If you're in the room, please wait for Nan to get to you with the microphone. If there are questions from folks on YouTube, my colleague Lauren Havelis will be bringing those to us.
Oh.
Hi. Okay. Yes, my question is, I was looking at 3 close-up portraits of your subjects.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was Booker T. Washington,
Mm-hmm.
taken in Washington, I think, or Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a very lively expression in his eye,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm a dude almost. Like,
This one
look
here?
at that. That is not a typical 19th century expression. Usually they look like slightly.
A little bit more. Yeah. Yeah.
And the next one was Chief
Plenty.
Coup.
Mm-hmm.
And in that portrait, what I noticed right away is I sort of looked at the book, but what struck me is how proud he looked.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yes,
the last
absolutely.
photo of him, his whole expression had changed. He had lost,
This one here?
he looks a little bit, may I say, no,
This one here?
that one.
Mm-hmm.
He looks a little bit beaten down.
Mm.
And then the last one, the original portrait of King Kamehameha,
Mm-hmm.
look at the expression in his eyes. He looks, I could recognize that expression. And it's a man who's proud and he's really confused. And the next picture that was translated by a Chinese artist, the whole expression is completely different.
Mm.
So that's my question. It's really an observation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hi, maybe you mentioned this and I just didn't catch it, but
Mhm.
what exactly is a chickadee person?
That's a great question. And that actually was something that one of the librarians was sort of probing me also to explain a little bit more. So it's this embodiment of the sort of qualities of the chickadee, right? So it's a small animal. It's a little bird, right? It's not physically strong, but it's one that's very sort of, according to Plenty Coups' interpretation, receptive, right? So open in his case to listening, to observing, to outsmarting potential predators, let's say, to use the analogy, right? So again, it's not about honing one's physical brute strength, but honing their intellectual capacities to survive.
I'm curious about how you imagine teaching with these materials. What are you
great
hoping to
question.
accomplish by bringing these kinds of images to your students?
That's a great question, Scott. I think, what I've come to, especially in this new age of AI, where that's really changed the game in terms of how we teach, why we teach. I think what was really key for me is the joy that I got out of going down these research rabbit holes and discovering things for myself, right? I just used a single image and then it just expanded to these whole stories. So how I would like to use these as is as examples. Not necessarily, here, just read these and answer some questions, but here's what you could do with a collection like the AAS's. And because these are also the digital collections, right? Have students do this, right? Be more of a mentor for them rather than that sort of top-down teacher figure, authority figure. And hearing from my students now, I am starting to integrate AI into some of my assignments. They like to do research. They like getting that excitement. They like following their own interests. So that's what I'm starting to see how these essays could fit into a curriculum as more of a model than a didactic material. Thanks, Scott.
Just a quick question out of curiosity. Was your choice of these three random or purposeful?
That's a good question. That's a great question. So I looked at the collections, which are online, which is super helpful. And I'll start with the Pleniku, because I think that's actually where I did start. And I just, looking at the range of the objects in that collection, these were photographs of indigenous peoples from the 19th, early 20th centuries. This just stood out because it was so distinctive from the others. And again, so doing the research, I found out why, right? This was very much a portrait. He was blind at the time, so he couldn't see it himself. But he knew Miller, he knew Linderman. This was, I don't know if I mentioned this, I'm sorry, in the talk, but this was used for promotion for his book. So he had much more agency over something like this than a lot of the other photographs you'll find, the studio photos, the, in situ photos. So this one really stood out to me because of that quality. The other thing too is he's sitting on his front porch. And this is the home that he built on that plot of land. So yeah, there's just a lot of ownership about this photograph that I could see, I just didn't know the story of initially. The Booker T one, similarly, I just felt like it was also distinctive. Let me come back to that. Right, it's his family, and it just had this sort of intimate quality that, again, the others of the buildings and work happening in the school, in the classroom, didn't have. And so this one just sort of, it did seem to stick out. And then the Kamehameha one, there were a lot to choose from there. I'll just come to that image here. And I think maybe at this point, I was thinking a lot about portraiture. I was thinking a lot about these individuals and how they're portrayed. So this one stood out in that sense because there's also a lot of those landscape scenes that we saw. There's maps, there's other things, but this one had that human quality that I was already investigating in the other two. So I think this seemed like sort of a natural choice, if that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Let's thank Olivia Chiang for this wonderful talk about three fascinating figures. And especially about the use of portraiture. There's so much you can do with visual images in teaching.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to learn more as you bring these to your students about how they respond. It's going to be great.
Thank you,
so
Scott.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming back to AAS to share with us what you've done here. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I just want to mention a couple of things coming up. By the way, this program will be available on our YouTube channel, so do tell your friends, tell your colleagues about the program. The next program is next Thursday, November 13th. It's a virtual program called Frances Ellen Watkins Harper's Civil War and Reconstruction with Eric Gardner in conversation with Sharita L. Johnson and Derek R. Spires. You can register for this and other programs on our website, AmericanAntiquarian.org. We're already getting on the website some of the listings for our spring programs as well, so you can get to know about what's coming up even after the new year. Check them out. But for now, thank you so much for being here and have a good evening.
Thank you all.